Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unit 1, which provides a backdrop for the course. It asks us to think about applications of linguistic theory to language teaching before we go more deeply into the different linguistic theories throughout the course. Now, in order to do that, for me, it's important that we first think about our own experience with language learning and language teaching. Probably everyone in this room has learned a foreign language, so you have your own experience with learning, and I believe many of you are teaching as well. But let's think about our own learning experience. Here is the cover of my first Spanish course book. I started learning Spanish when I was 14 years old, my first year of high school in the United States, and I fell in love with the language. I knew from then on that I wanted to be a Spanish teacher. I ended up being an English teacher, but that's another story. The book was full of exercises like this. We had lots of drills, so person, number, substitution. So the teacher would say, escuchan una canción, and then the whole class would say, and then she would say she, and then the whole class would say, escucha una canción, you. Escuchas una canción. Sometimes it was a whole class, or she'd go around one by one calling us on us. Then we'd do another verb, and that way, the different verb forms in Spanish became very familiar to us. I had no idea at the time that this was connected to a specific linguistic theory, but as Christian Matheson reminds us, this was very connected with American structural linguistics, and it was the audiolingual method. So what I'd like you to do right now, stop the recording, and if you have not yet done so, please respond to the first reflection question on our Moodle in Unit 1. And when you're done, come back. Okay, now that you've had time to reflect on your own language learning experiences, let's look at a broad timeline of methods of language teaching over the years and think about the linguistic theories that influences them. This is not to say that people, don't combine, for example, classical scholarship with communicative language teaching. But each of these ways of thinking about teaching and learning languages did become predominant at a given time. And often they were in reaction to a previous way of thinking about language and also about teaching language. So we'll start with the grammar translation method. This was before the 1900s and actually really before the onset of linguistics as a scientific understanding of the language. So it was influenced by classical scholarship about ways of thinking about, for example, verbs in Greek or verbs in Latin. It involved very much the translation of literary texts, often from Greek or Latin, memorization of grammar, rules, vocabulary lists. It really focused on language as a written and static system. So along comes Henry Sweet, late 19th, early 20th century, Henry Sweet and others, and the interest in the spoken language, which also coincided with the onset of tape recording. So people could now record the spoken language and think about, well, what is it? What are those sounds that are put together to create language? And Henry Sweet was a phonetician. He was also a pioneer in applied linguistics. And he was a member of the Reform movement, which, was in reaction to that grammar translation method and, advocated for spoken language and phonetics to be actually used in the language classroom to help people to get a feel for the foreign language, because language is primarily spoken, so they felt it really should be taught that way. This led to what's known as the direct method, immersion in everyday conversation with no mother tongue. I once had a course in teaching through the direct method, and we could not use our mother tongue at all. Or the student's mother tongue. And so we could point to things, and students would have to name them. We could use pictures, things like that. But the idea was, they really need to be immersed in speaking and using the foreign language through the spoken mode. then along came structural linguistics, and that focused now, on language as a system of patterns and structures. And combined with behavioral psychology, which has to do with habit formation, that our behaviors are habits that become instilled with us over through repetition over time. And so this led to the audiolingual method, which was the method that I was learning through when I first started learning Spanish. So drills, mimicry, repetition, so that those forms would become ingrained in our brains. Then, in reaction to that, was Chomsky's generative grammar. Now, as we'll be seeing in Unit 2, Chomsky really did not have anything to say about language teaching, okay? But he did think about language as it appears or as it sits, as it lives in our brains, those internal cognitive processes that allow us to generate sentences, to generate structures. It's not a habit formation, it's in our brains. And so this shifted the focus away from surface level patterning to thinking about the underlying rules and structures that learners hold in their brains. So the interest moved into thinking about the learner's internal grammar and the importance of rich and meaningful input to reinforce that rule construction within the learner's brain. And again, I said Chomsky wasn't interested in language teaching, but this did lead to people like Stephen Krashen thinking about a distinction between acquisition. So what we can just acquire because our brains are the way they are, because our brains, in a sense, have or are a language acquisition device. And so the input helps us just to learn those structures. Then we can monitor what we've acquired through learnt knowledge, specific, overt, explicit knowledge that we can get in the language learning classroom. And we'll be seeing more about that in Unit 2. Then, as a reaction to that, to moving from inside the brain to outside the brain into interaction and thinking about what we use language for. Functional linguists like Michael Halliday, whose work we'll be seeing in Units 4 and 5, emphasize language use in social contexts. So what language does rather than how it's formed. So it's thinking about language as a set of resources, a can-do, rather than a set of rules. And this led to communicative language teaching, where the focus is on fluency, on meaning, on real-life communication, not being perfectly rule-formed. And this led to approaches also such as content and language integrated learning, or CLIL, and task-based learning. And now, from the 1990s to the present, cognitive linguistics came to the fore and contributed to thinking about how we teach and learn languages by staying outside there in the functional world, what we actually do with language, but not leaving aside the fact that it's shaped by our brains, our bodies, by how we perceive, how we categorize the world, by our conceptual systems. So it emphasizes meaning, also metaphors, so ways we have of thinking about the world. And, you can think about the preposition system in English. We live in a country, not on a country, that kind of thing. So, how language reflects a culture's way of thinking. So thinking about those conceptual metaphors can help us think about how learners understand abstractions and maybe differently from their first language to a foreign language. And we'll be seeing more about cognitive linguistics in Unit 3. So it does involve teaching through meaningful exposure, pattern recognition, raising learners' awareness of, these embodied approaches to language. And so it serves as a complement to communicative and task-based approaches to language. So that's just a broad timeline of methods. Of what you should do in this unit is, again, write your reflection. I hope you've done that already. You've viewed this video if you're at this point. Do the readings, and there are a couple of reading guides to help you think about the importance of those readings. Then there's a second reflection question on our Moodle, and then you should respond to the discussion. And at any time, please pop me an email with any questions you may have, or you can add them to the general discussion on our Moodle. See you soon. Bye-bye.